In the depths of the prehistoric world, creatures have appeared that we would certainly not suspect of enormous strength or predatory abilities at first glance. Sometimes, however, even an inconspicuous creature can hide something completely unexpected. One of the most surprising discoveries of paleontology is the frog, which stands out from anything we normally associate with this species. At a time when giant lizards ruled the world and carnivorous giants roamed the landscape, an inconspicuous but deadly predator existed in the silence and muddy pools. This frog could hide under a layer of leaves or under the surface to pounce on its unsuspecting prey at the right moment. And it didn't have to be just insects or small reptiles. Her attacks were fast, her jaws surprisingly strong, and her hunting method surprisingly effective. What kind of creature was it that could cross the boundaries of the normal food chain? How is it possible that an amphibian, a group of animals that we usually associate with quiet croaking and passivity, could stand face to face with the creatures we now talk about in history books? In the following chapters, we will delve into the fascinating story of this ancient animal, which completely rethinks our view of who could have been a hunter and who was a prey in prehistoric times. Get ready for a shocking discovery that you definitely wouldn't bet on with a frog. This exceptional frog was named Beelzebufo ampinga, which can be loosely translated as devil frog or frog from hell. It was discovered in sediments in Madagascar, and its fossils were dated to the Upper Cretaceous period, approximately 70 million years ago. At that time, Madagascar was still separated from the African mainland and had its own ecosystems with very specific creatures. Scientists estimate that Beelzebufo could have grown to a length of over 20 centimeters, but its body was massive and robust, much stronger than that of today's frogs. Despite its name, Beelzebufo was not a demonic creature in the supernatural sense of the word, but rather a natural curiosity that combined the typical morphology of the frog with unexpected physical strength and aggressive predatory behavior. It was able to open its mouth very wide, and its skull was strengthened to withstand strong impacts. Compared to today's frogs, it was a real giant. Although it could visually resemble a horned beetle, it was significantly larger, and its jaws were designed so that it could bite into much larger prey than we know from today's amphibians. One of the most surprising aspects of Beelzebufo was its incredible jaw strength. Scientists conducted biomechanical simulations based on the skull's structure and concluded that its bite could reach a force of up to 2,000 newtons. This is roughly the same as the bite of today's wolf, or even a smaller crocodile. In terms of body size, this power was extreme and completely beyond the normal capabilities of today's frogs. This grip allowed it to grip and hold prey that was larger than insects or small vertebrates. This strong grip could serve not only to kill the victim instantly, but also to prevent the prey from breaking free. Due to the fact that her skull and wide mouth were significantly strengthened, she was able to bite deep and maintain her grip until she completely immobilized her victim. It is therefore not surprising that it is assumed that the Beelzebufo could have hunted baby dinosaurs, which were very vulnerable during their first days of life. Its grip thus became one of the most impressive weapons among prehistoric amphibians. While most of today's frogs feed on insects, worms, or small vertebrates, Beelzebufo most likely focused on larger prey. It could feed not only on small mammals and lizards, but also on freshly hatched dinosaurs. Its hunting strategy was to attack by surprise. It lurked hidden in the mud or under the leaves, where it waited motionlessly. As soon as an unsuspecting creature appeared near her, she sprang to her feet with an unexpectedly swift movement and clutched it in her mouth. Interestingly, it was not an active hunter. Beelzebufo was rather a passive, but all the more dangerous predator. Her body structure allowed her to wait for a long time until the opportunity presented itself. She could rely on her strong hind legs for a short lunge, but most of the attack was provided by her mouth and jaw mechanism. It was an absolutely effective and surprising way to survive in the prehistoric landscape. Although the Beelzebufo is undoubtedly a frog from a biological point of view, its size, strength, and hunting method put it on the border of what people commonly imagine under the term amphibian. Her appearance was undoubtedly terrifying. Her broad skull, forward-facing eyes, rough skin, and huge mouth had created the image of a creature that seemed to have fallen out of a nightmare. Outwardly terrifying. Her broad skull, forward-facing eyes, rough skin, and huge mouth created the image of a creature that seemed to have fallen out of a nightmare. Nevertheless, it was a real animal that moved among other prehistoric creatures and played its unmistakable role in the ecosystem of the time. However, it was no mystical monster. Beelzebufo was just another proof of how diverse and unpredictable evolution could be. Its existence reminds us that even seemingly familiar groups of animals can hide surprises that change our view of the whole period. In prehistoric times, there were no clear rules, and Beelzebufo illustrates this perfectly. Beelzebufo had a physique that was adapted to life in extreme environments. Her body was flat, wide, and solidly built, which allowed her to be stable when lurking in the field. The skeleton, especially the skull and pelvis, was significantly strengthened, which supported its ability to withstand impacts and grip prey tightly. According to scientific reconstructions, the skin of this frog was thick and rough, with bumps and growths that provided it with camouflage and some passive defense against predators. It is possible that it could have been partially warty, similar to some of today's ratcheted frogs. Its coloration has survived only in speculation, but it is assumed that it was earthy, camouflage shades, dark brown, green, grayish, or a combination to blend in with the surrounding environment. The combination of a robust body and protective coloring made it an almost invisible killer. In addition, its body was strong enough to deal with prey that defended itself or was slightly larger than normal frog food. The home of Beelzebufo was the prehistoric ecosystems of Madagascar, which were completely different from the current form of the island in the Upper Cretaceous period. At that time, it was an environment with dry and rainy seasons, where wetlands, seasonal lakes, and lowland forests alternated. It was these conditions that created an ideal environment for amphibians, plenty of water at certain times of the year, and plenty of space to shelter during dry phases. The Beelzebufo probably moved in muddy pools, along riverbeds or in wooded lowlands, where it lurked for prey and at the same time could easily hide. Due to dry periods, it probably had a certain ability to estivate, a kind of summer sleep, during which it survived adverse conditions by burying itself in the soil. We know such behavior in some modern frogs. The prehistoric landscape was home to many small dinosaurs, various reptiles, pterosaurs, and other vertebrates. And Beelzebufo occupied an unexpectedly dominant place in this colorful world within its ecological niche. In the territory of Madagascar at that time, there were several species of small to medium-sized dinosaurs with which Beelzebufo could come into contact, especially during the hatching period. One of the most famous was the carnivorous Majungasaurus, which was too big as an adult, but its young could be vulnerable prey for the frog. Another likely candidate is Repetosaurus, a small titanosaur whose babies were relatively small and defenseless at birth. These young could have been an easy target for an unexpected amphibian in the first weeks of life. It should be remembered that during hatching and the first days of life, baby dinosaurs were extremely endangered. There were no parents who would guard them like today's birds. Many had to take care of themselves from birth. In such an environment, Beelzebufo was not just a stranger. She was a real threat. One approach to a water source was enough for the frog to strike. It is fascinating to think that baby dinosaurs could fall victim to a frog that most people would imagine harmless. The discovery of Beelzebufo marked a major turning point in the view of the ecological role of frogs in prehistoric times. Until then, amphibians were perceived as second-class participants in the ecosystem. Small, passive, uninteresting. However, with the discovery of this fossil giant, it turned out that the frog could also be a key predator in the food chain. In addition, this creature has provided us with valuable information about the evolution of frogs and their adaptability. For example, the strengthened skull and unusually strong jaw grip indicate a high degree of specialization that is no longer present in modern species. From the point of view of paleontology and evolutionary biology, Beelzebufo represents a bridge between today's amphibians and their ancient ancestors, who lived during the period when the planet was dominated by dinosaurs. It shows that even seemingly stable and simple groups of animals can hide huge morphological and ecological diversity. Thanks to its existence, we now know that frogs in the past were not only insectivores, they could also have been serious predators who dared to do anything smaller than themselves. Compared to today's frogs, Beelzebufo was not only significantly larger, but also different in terms of anatomy and behavior. Most modern frog species have a soft, elastic skull that allows them to absorb pressure and adapt to different ways of life. Beelzebufo, on the other hand, had an extremely reinforced skull, resembling armor. Its jaws were reinforced and structurally adapted to the high mechanical load that arose during the bite. Such a skull structure is unparalleled among amphibians in today's world. While today's frogs mostly specialize in small prey, and many of them have excellent jumping skills, Beelzebufo was rather cumbersome, built for short, explosive movements. She didn't need to actively jump long distances, but her massive hind legs allowed her to lunge violently and devastatingly toward her victim. This strategy of passive lurking and sudden attack occurs today in only a few species of frogs, which, however, are not comparably strong. Beelzebufo thus represents an exceptional evolutionary experiment of nature that has never been repeated. The idea that Beelzebufo has survived to the present day is frighteningly fascinating. In today's world, it would be considered an extremely dangerous creature, especially in places where it could hide undetected. Imagine that a person went to a tropical forest and a 20-centimeter amphibian was waiting for him in the wetlands, capable of hunting a cat, a small dog, or even a newborn. It would be necessary to treat it as a dangerous predator, similar to crocodiles or poisonous snakes. It is possible that it would become part of local legends and folklore, a demonic frog that swallows animals at night. It might be subject to protection, but it would also command respect. Breeding in captivity would be extremely demanding and risky. Her strong bite would easily crush even a protective glove, and if she felt threatened, she could be very aggressive. Maybe we would keep it in the zoo as a rarity, but each enclosure would have to be carefully secured. Its existence in the modern world would fundamentally change our perception of what an amphibian can represent. Despite its size and strength, Beelzebufo was not entirely without enemies. In prehistoric times, there were predators that would dare to attack it, especially larger carnivorous dinosaurs and some species of crocodilian reptiles that inhabited similar wetland habitats. Still, its physique was robust enough to resist smaller predators, and its ability to hide and camouflage provided it with significant defenses. In addition, in case of danger, it could make strong warning sounds or hide under the water surface. However, it was more vulnerable in the dry season. It could be exposed to greater risk when moving from drying sites. During estivation, it was probably passive and relying on the surrounding environment. Adults were apparently attacked only by the largest predators. However, the Beelzebufo cubs probably faced a greater threat. Their smaller body was easier prey, and they had to hide quickly or stay in damp crevices and mud cavities to survive the first critical weeks of life. The closest living relatives of Beelzebufo are the horned frogs, especially the well-known Argentine horned frog, also known as Ceratophrys. Although it reaches a maximum length of 15 centimeters and does not have such strong jaws, its appearance and hunting method resembles its prehistoric relative. Horned beetles have a wide muzzle, a solid skull, and specialize in lurking hunting. Some species can hunt smaller rodents or birds, which is quite unusual for a frog. From an evolutionary point of view, it is interesting that certain features have survived to this day. For example, the frontal placement of the eyes, the distinctive jaw structure, or the explosive lunge towards the victim. These traits show us how deeply entrenched some successful predatory strategies can be, even when the size and environment have changed dramatically over millions of years. Yet, no frog today can match Beelzebufo in size, strength, or predatory courage. Although we do not have direct evidence of Beelzebufo's toxicity, this possibility cannot be completely ruled out. In many frogs today, especially in the tropics, venom production is an important part of the defense against predators. Some species have toxic skin that causes irritation or even death to other animals. If the Beelzebufo lived in an environment full of predators, a similar strategy could develop as a form of passive defense, especially during periods when it was not fully protected. For example, in youth or during the migration period. The frog's skin was apparently thick and probably bumpy, which could theoretically allow the formation of protective chemicals. However, given the size of its body and the overall evolutionary adaptation to hunting, any toxicity would not be the main weapon, but rather a complementary protection. If it really produced the poison, it could also be dangerous for humans, for example, in contact with an open wound or mucous membranes, similar to some poison frogs. Like today's frogs, Beelzebufo probably began its life as an egg laid in an aquatic environment. After hatching, the tadpole stage followed, during which it developed in an aquatic environment where it fed on plankton, detritus, or other small organisms. Due to the potential predators in prehistoric waters, this developmental section was very dangerous. The young tadpoles may have been threatened by other aquatic fauna or drought, so they probably sought shelter in shallow, muddy waters or among plants after metamorphosis. When they lost their gills and gained limbs, they gradually began to adapt to the terrestrial environment. At this stage, they were most vulnerable. They were not yet big or strong enough to defend themselves, but at the same time, they were no longer protected by water. As they grew older, their bodies became stronger, their jaws strengthened, and the originally defenseless creature became a predator. Interestingly, they may have had a basic version of their powerful bite at a young age, which would have allowed them to catch smaller vertebrates and crawl towards the food ladder very quickly. It's tempting to imagine that if humans had existed at the same time as Beelzebufo, this frog could have become the model for many legends and myths. Her demonic appearance, unexpected size, and ability to swallow animals that a frog would otherwise never dare make her an ideal candidate for the myth of the swamp creature. If she were part of folklore, she could be portrayed as a guardian of the swamps, a night killer who attacks without warning, or as a punishing spirit who swallows the disobedient. While stories of giant frogs don't appear often in the real world, many cultures have legends of giant amphibians or reptiles. It is not hard to imagine that Beelzebufo would have become the center of myths on the level of dragons if she had ever come into contact with human civilization. Its existence could inspire the same respect in people as, for example, alligators or huge snakes. And who knows, maybe some myths about demonic beings from the wetlands have deeper prehistoric roots than we realize today. There are no exact data on the life expectancy of Beelzebufo, but according to its size and growth rate, as estimated from fossils, it could have reached the age of 10 to 15 years, possibly more. This would classify it as a longer-lived amphibian, which would make sense given its predatory position and slower development. Unlike smaller frog species that only live for a few years, Beelzebufo would need a longer time to reach its full size and reproduce. In its environment, which has been affected by seasonal cycles of drought and rain, a longer lifespan would have provided an advantage. It could survive more cycles and increase the chances of survival of its offspring. Its physical constitution resistance to predators, and camouflage abilities allowed it to survive in inhospitable conditions that could kill smaller amphibians. The longevity of this species was therefore advantageous not only in terms of reproduction, but also in terms of dominance in the ecological system. Although Beelzebufo is undoubtedly the most iconic and best researched giant frog of prehistoric times, it was not the only one. Paleontologists have discovered other species of fossil frogs that show signs of larger dimensions, although none of them has reached such extreme size and robustness. An example is the genus Calyptocephalella, whose representatives were found in the territory of today's Chile and Argentina. Although they were smaller than Beelzebufo, they were still relatively large frogs compared to today's species. This discovery suggests that the phenomenon of giant frogs was not completely isolated and that similar ecological niches may have existed in other parts of the world. It is possible that in the Cretaceous or Paleogene periods, more specialized lineages of amphibians emerged, which adapted to hunt larger prey. However, none of these frogs had such massive jaws, armored skulls, and predatory abilities as Beelzebufo. In this respect, it remains absolutely unique among known amphibian species. The cause of the extinction of Beelzebufo is not entirely certain, but it is probably related to climatic changes and geological events at the end of the Cretaceous period. At that time, there was a significant cooling and climate fluctuation, which mainly affected the tropical and subtropical areas where Beelzebufo lived. Changes in seasonality, drying up of water bodies, and loss of suitable habitats could have had a fatal impact on its population. In addition, the extinction at the end of the Cretaceous, which wiped out non-avian dinosaurs, affected the entire ecosystem. It is possible that with the disappearance of small dinosaurs that could have been its prey, its food chain collapsed. If it was very specialized and dependent on a certain type of prey, it could have difficulty adapting to new conditions. Longevity and slow development, which gave it an advantage under stable conditions, could become a disadvantage in a world full of rapid changes. Eventually, this unique frog was swallowed up by a wave of extinction that swept away entire ecosystems. When we say frog, most of us imagine a small, damp creature sitting on a stone by a pond. But prehistory had its own definitions of commonplace, and it was the Beelzebufo, or devil frog, that completely crushed those definitions. It was a frog that, with its appearance, strength, and behavior, was beyond anything we would expect from an amphibian. Not only did it survive in the harsh conditions of ancient Madagascar, but it also became an active predator at a time when dinosaurs ruled the world. Her jaws could crush bones, her body was adapted to lurking and lightning attack, and her story was indelibly written in the history of paleontology. Beelzebufo is an example of the fact that even seemingly insignificant animal groups can hide surprising abilities. Its existence reminds us that in prehistoric times nothing was given, and that any animal, even the size of a human palm, could be a real threat. Thank you for going into the depths of time in the footsteps of this fascinating frog. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe. This will help create more prehistoric stories. Thanks a lot.